You're staring at a fleet designed to flatten planets, not negotiate treaties. Commander Torin Vask didn't wait for the Council to absorb the data. He stepped into the projection ring, index finger stabbing toward the towering image of the alien vessels holding position near Jupiter's orbit. Every vessel stretched for kilometers. Jagged, ink-black hulls shaped like inverted blades, their hull signatures radiating unknown energy patterns. They weren't here for diplomacy. Not with a formation like that. Inside the Geneva strategic bunker, the lights had already dimmed to war protocol. A cool gust from the climate system carried the faint tang of sterilizer fluid and recycled air, brushing against Torin's jaw like the draft of a pressure leak. The room stank of unease. Bodies sweating behind suits, breath catching, minds scrambling. Counselor Drax folded his arms tightly over his chest. They claim to offer protection. They haven't fired a shot. Because they're waiting for us to sign our own execution, Torn replied. You don't bring a sword to offer an umbrella. The laser-framed heads-up displays shimmered overhead, pulsing red as new data from the Jovian array poured in. Orbital velocity, radiation flux, power output. All the numbers were climbing. Naveen Kaur, Earth's lead systems analyst, leaned over his console, brow furrowed beneath cropped black hair, his fingers racing across the keypad. Their formation is static, but their emitters just spiked again. We're looking at a quantum link relay core somewhere in the center of that armada. They're syncing with something. Or someone, Torin muttered. Patch in the envoy transmission. I want every voice in this room to hear what surrender sounds like. The main display shifted, then blinked once, loading the transmission feed. A Vryn figure emerged, tall, with matte gray skin and elongated mandibles that clicked between syllables. Its eyes were faceted, glassy, without depth. When it spoke, its words came through the translator with a deep, rehearsed cadence. Terra-class civilization. Your military resistance is noted, inefficient. We offer you integration, defense through unity, comply with the terms, full surrender of strategic command, and transfer of orbital control within 30 planetary rotations. Denial will trigger immediate neutralization. The synthex are coming. Our shield includes you only if you step inside it. Define neutralization, grunted General Varnick from the far end of the chamber. He was old Earth military, rigid as the steel bars bolting the floor beneath them. Torin turned the transmission off with a chop of his hand. We don't need a definition. We just saw their translator call our sovereignty inefficient. A low, anxious murmur rippled across the council circle. The table surface, carved from repurposed heat shield tile, reflected the room's flickering status panels like bruised glass. Everyone at that table had spent decades debating over domestic reconstruction plans, water regulation systems, and trade corridor expansion. None of them had faced a threat that could fold Earth's Navy in one orbit sweep. Counselor Aben shook his head slowly. We're looking at a force multiplier we can't counter. They outgun us 10 to 1. And this synthex, we don't even know what it is. Torin looked toward the secondary display. Satellite clips played. Static bursts. Smudged recordings, broken sensor logs. Outposts on the edge of known space reduced to data noise. Burned stations, planetary scans of cities scraped clean. No survivors, no transmissions. Just the time-stamped decay of life. We don't know them yet. But we know what the Vryn want. And it's not partnership, it's placement. They want us on the board, as bait. Nobbin stiffened. You're thinking they want Earth to be the front line? Torin nodded once. Think about it. A resource-rich, industrially viable planet with no outer sister colonies and a unified global command? Perfect decoy. They're not offering to protect us. They're offering to use us. And if we're right, added Varnick grimly, then we're already surrounded. The bunker shook, only faintly, a rumble in the reinforced substructure that passed like distant thunder. Some of the counselors looked up reflexively. The walls were over 60 meters thick, wrapped in impact-dampening armor and buried beneath alpine bedrock, but nothing man-made was absolute. Not anymore. Torin addressed the room with his back straight, eyes firm, words deliberate. We've survived worse than this by never depending on handouts. We refused it on Earth, we'll refuse it now. There's no pact worth accepting when the price is your freedom. Counselor Eben frowned. So what do you propose? Fight both the Vren and the Syntax? I propose we see them both clearly, Torin said, but first I want proof. Not from their mouths, from our systems. He turned to Navin. Initiate Aegis. Navin's eyes widened. Sir, Aegis is still off-grid. We haven't completed full integration. Then finish it, Torin snapped. I want those lunar craters lighting up in 10 minutes. Navin didn't argue. He darted from the room, already shouting commands into his comms band. Aegis. The word carried weight in classified channels. A planetary-scale surveillance system laced through the moon's hidden terrain, buried in electromagnetic shielding, powered by AI that could learn alien language structures in hours. Its sole directive, monitor beyond the solar veil. It had never been tested against a real-time threat. Until now. Torin faced the council again, his tone sharper now, more deliberate. You have 15 minutes to make a decision. We surrender, and they turn Earth into bait. We stall, and we learn. This isn't a negotiation table. This is the moment we decide what it means to still be human. The heads-up display flashed, new vectors. The Vrin ships were shifting formation. The command ship in the center rotated slightly, its angular hull glowing in sharp green bursts. They're aligning their blockade, Navin's voice crackled through the chamber comms. Orbital locks have started. They've cut our Mars corridor. No transports are leaving. They're trying to box us in. Torin exhaled through his nose, slow and deliberate. Then he looked up at the map. His jaw clenched. Let them draw the box. We'll decide what escapes it. He stepped from the display ring and reached for his terminal. Prep launch control, we're sending a probe to the edge of the formation. I want to see what kind of net they're weaving, and if we can tear it. Counselor Eben asked, and if they respond with fire? Torin didn't hesitate. Then they just proved me right. Transmit this, Torin ordered, his breath leaving a sharp cloud across the chill of the command deck. To the Vren fleet. Global priority unencrypted. The comms officer's hand hovered hesitantly above the console. Sir, do we want to leave room for negotiation? Torin's glare cut through him. They showed up with warships. We answer in kind. He leaned over the input feed, his voice as steady as the floor beneath Geneva's hardened bunker. To the Vren Collective, Earth rejects your proposal. Our sovereignty is not negotiable, and your blockade is an act of aggression. Withdraw your forces or be interpreted as hostile. End transmission. The deck fell into absolute stillness, not from fear, but waiting. Murky light filtered through the filtered ceiling vents, just strong enough to cast warped shadows on the floor below. Dust particles drifted between the console stations, dislodged by the subsonic rumble of orbital movement tracked by Earth's upper atmosphere monitors. The sound barely touched the room, but made itself known through the soft tremble in the walls and the vibration underfoot. The pressure of expectation settled like a weight on every ribcage in the room. Navin stormed back in, collar unbuttoned, sweat lining his temples. Aegis is waking up. We've got partial link integrity with 3 of the buried craters. That gives us 2,000 square kilometers of signal coverage. We'll have more if you give me 30 minutes. You've got 10, Torin replied. And make it count. The council was still seated behind him, boxed into a semicircle of steel, concrete, and blinking panic indicators. Most stared at the floor or the data feed scrolling past. Counselor Drax broke the silence first. You just committed Earth to a confrontation it may not survive. You didn't even call for a full vote. Torin turned, slow and deliberate. I didn't have to. Under Article 11, Wartime Override Protocol can be triggered when foreign military forces disrupt Earth's orbital continuity. The Vren just cut our Mars corridor. That's disruption. You're playing poker with extinction. I'm calling a bluff with teeth. Drax opened his mouth again, but the sound of a new transmission override silenced him. The lights in the chamber dimmed. Aegis was asserting itself into the command feed. Monitors began flickering with raw Vren signal patterns. Triangular waveform disruptions, packet loops encoded in multi-frequency intervals. The AI's voice came through the side speaker in a clipped, modulated tone, devoid of drama but sharpened by intent. Interception successful. Translation in progress. Vren fleet internal chatter indicates planetary designation, lost site alpha. Correlated terms, host, decoy, strategic offering, expendable asset. The words hit like punches. Varnick leaned forward in his seat, fingers pressed into the surface of the table. They were never planning to help us, he muttered. They're offering Earth as the bait. Let the synthex hit us first. Weaken them, then clean up the aftermath. Torin didn't answer. He didn't need to. The council chamber reacted on its own, breaths drawn sharply, fists tightening on chair arms. One man cursed under his breath. Navin's hands danced across the console, sinking Aegis into the deeper spectrum. The bunker's temperature fluctuated with every passing second. The thermal draw of the servers fighting to stabilize under the strain of layered decryptions. The scent of warm plastics and charged air burned faintly near the primary cable feeds. Aegis continued. Vren fleet commencing reposition, outer blockade forming around lunar orbit, inner formation tightening earthward. Data lines suggest intention to isolate Earth from exoplanetary routes. Mars outbound completely severed. Venus relay compromised. Counselor Iben looked like someone had driven a nail through his stomach. That means we're locked in. No outgoing logistics, no incoming data relays. They're putting a lid on us. They're sealing the jar, Torn corrected, hoping we'll cook inside it before they ever have to fire a shot. Varnick stood up, jaw clenched so tightly the skin behind his ears twitched. We activate global readiness protocols. Call up all orbital platforms, civilian transports, anything with sub-orbital lift capability. We start repurposing them for strategic deployment. I'm not handing civilians over for this, Drax snapped. You won't need to, Torin said. They'll volunteer when they understand what the Vren are doing. Naveen looked up. We'll have to inform the world. Full broadcast. Let them know what's actually happening. Torin gave a sharp nod. Pull up the Earthline comms net. We do it now. A second later, every screen lit up across the globe. Government terminals, personal comms, emergency relay towers, all of them cycling through the Geneva bunker broadcast. Torin stepped into the relay circle, his uniform unbuttoned at the neck, boots still carrying the dust from the entry stairwell. He looked into the camera and didn't blink. This is Commander Torin Vask. I speak to all Terran citizens, wherever you are. A fleet claiming to offer protection has arrived near Jupiter. They say we must submit. They promise peace. But we've intercepted their true message. They see Earth as expendable. They want us as bait. For an enemy we haven't seen, but they fear. He paused, letting the words land. Then continued, voice lower. We have faced invaders before. Not always from above. Sometimes from within. Always with one answer. We do not surrender what was earned through sacrifice. We will not kneel for safety. We will stand for survival. He stepped away. The camera cut. The room didn't speak for a long time. Aegis pulsed again. Full integration with Northern Lunar Arc complete. monitoring Vren relay nodes for cross-traffic. Encrypted back-channel detected. Vren forward operations discussing Earth's resistance as beneficial may increase Synthek's interest. They're escalating on purpose, Naven whispered. The more we resist, the more attractive Earth becomes to the Syntheks. Torin's hands were folded behind his back. His mind was already moving 6 steps forward. Then we have to become less attractive and more dangerous. Aegis is our eye. Now, we need a spear. He turned to Vornik. I want you to start drafting orbital railgun loadouts. Pair them for synchronous planetary defense. We reprogram targeting algorithms. No more asteroids. From now on, we shoot warships. Varnik nodded once, already moving. Torin shifted toward the back wall of the bunker, where a decommissioned mission board still held scraps from old planetary defense drills. He tore them down with both hands. We don't wait for their next move, he said. We make one they never expected. Suit up, we leave in 6 minutes. Torin didn't raise his voice, but the order hit like a snapped trigger. Inside the staging chamber, carved into the lower hangar bay, his breath fogged against the pressurized visor seal as the outer hatch rumbled shut. The walls vibrated faintly from solar flare fallout washing across Earth's orbital shield grid. Radiation storms meant comms blackouts, sensor blindness, and for one brief window, a hole in the Vren's surveillance lattice. Ganymede was cold, deep, and watched. And today, just for one pass, they could slip through its teeth. Torin tugged his chestplate down, locked the final seal, and nodded to Navin Kor, who stood by the rack of breaching gear, checking load balance without speaking. The younger man's fingers were shaking, not from fear, from calculation. Solar flux curve says we've got 8 minutes of EM scatter cover, Navin said, sliding a phase disruptor into its cradle. After that, their relay node sees everything down to body heat. Torin checked the HUD lining the inside of his helmet, not holographic, just a film-thin overlay integrated directly into the inner lens. He tapped his temple once, watched the shuttle schematic scroll through, and then looked up at the last man entering. Soren Tulk, ex-Zapper, now Earth's highest-rated foreign systems analyst, stepped into the chamber. His face was lined with orbital scarring and a narrow gash still healing near his right ear. The man rarely spoke unless data required it. But now, sliding into his harness, he offered a dry grunt. This shuttle wasn't built for stealth, he muttered. Radiation shielding's patchwork. We catch a microburst wrong and the internal mesh cooks us. Torin fastened the hull clamps on the side rail. Then stay off the Ron trajectory. They launched under raw flare cover. No escort, no long-range radar. Just the roar of propulsion bleeding into the walls of the cabin, rattling their boots against the deck floor as gravity peeled backward. The viewports dimmed automatically, reacting to ultraviolet saturation as solar bursts washed over the dark side of Earth's moon. Through slitted glass, the rim of light along the lunar edge bled orange into the void. Soren grunted again as the G-forces lifted slightly. Our glide vector is going to skirt the upper edge of Ganymede's comms cloud. That relay tower's AI will trigger if it registers any object breaking lateral symmetry. You sound like someone expecting to die, Torin replied. Soren didn't look up. I expect things to go wrong. Makes me thorough. Ganymede grew in the forward glass, a frozen slate wrapped in orbital bands of blue-white signal rings. And nestled at the southern pole, one of the Vren's primary relay nodes. It wasn't armored. It didn't need to be. Every Vren ship in the solar radius depended on that node to coordinate fleet behavior through faster-than-light command echo. Destroy the relay, and their web collapsed. For a few hours, maybe more, long enough, they descended without trigger flares. Their shuttle dropped low, skimming the edge of the icy crust. The pilot, an anonymous, black-suited operator from Orbital Recon, banked the ship under the ridge as the flare storm peaked. Interference gave them a curtain. Not a shield, but enough to block a god's glance. Inside the node's signal blind zone, the shuttle's rear clamp hissed. Torin, Soren, and Navin disembarked. Beneath their boots, Ganymeter's crust crackled. A deep-buried quake line rumbled through the glacial shelf, sending microshocks through the frozen crust that vibrated in their spines. Ahead, the node loomed. Not a tower, but a sloped array embedded into the surface like a buried fin, its exterior coated in pulsating veins of crystalline plating that rippled as though breathing. Soren dropped to one knee beside the access hatch, pressed a thermal cutter into the panel seal, and began slicing. Navin kept watch, his visor lenses adjusting to the alien luminance. If their AI sees this heat signature, "We're already dead," Soren replied. The panel broke free with a hiss, and inside streams of vapor escaped like breath. They crawled through the access shaft, ducking under growths of alien conduits that twisted like fungal roots through the ceiling. The temperature dropped with each meter, the walls wet with condensation from internal heat cycling. Inside the relay control chamber, the core spun silently in the center. A suspended crystal ring rotating inside a gravitational lock, held aloft by field repulsion and tuned magnetic pressure. Its light pulsed in irregular beats, echoing commands across the void. Earth's fleet had never seen one up close. No one had. Soren raised his disruptor array, fingers trembling as he lined up the signal intercept clamps. He inserted 2 spiked nodes, one into each of the ring's alignment ports. "Once I trigger it," he said, "they lose sync across all active battle groups for 6 hours. But only if we fry the backup layer underneath." Navin pulled out the virus injector. "This will short their redundancy, but it'll blow out the relay's inner shell. The resulting surge will burn the room," Soren cut in. "You two need to be outside by then." Torin stepped forward. "You think I'm leaving you here?" Soren turned. For the first time, his face softened. Not friendly, just clear. "I'm not asking. I'm telling. This is my job." A vibration rang through the floor. Something in the Vren system noticed. Lights above their heads flickered. The gravity anchor beneath the crystal buzzed. Time was over. Torin looked at him. One nod. No more. He and Navin sprinted down the corridor, oxygen recycling whistling inside their suits. Behind them, the chamber flared in red, warning systems waking. Then came the sound of cascading glass and surging energy. Soren's voice snapped through their helmet feeds. "Tell them we gave Earth 6 hours to think." And then, nothing. By the time the shuttle lifted, the relay node collapsed inward. Ganimi's pole lit with uncontrolled discharge, cascading across the relay bands. In space above, the Vren fleet shuddered. Ships drifting out of formation, targeting systems misaligning, strategic overlays vanishing mid-transit. It looked like a convulsion. A nervous system, losing its map. Back in orbit, Earth's watch stations erupted in data. "The Vren are pulling back," one officer shouted in disbelief. "They're remootering all command to internal backups." Torin said nothing. He pulled off his helmet, eyes dry, jaw clenched. Navin sat opposite him, slumped, breathing hard, hands covered in dust and frost. As if reading his thoughts, a strong smile flickered on Corin's dampened lips. Nobody spoke of Soren. The mission had succeeded. The net was broken. Earth had time. The war room lights hadn't changed in hours, but everything else had. Torin Vask stood motionless at the far edge of the Geneva HQ's command floor, watching a live stream of orbital drift data flicker across a half-sunken monitor. Vren fleet units still floated in near Jovian proximity, but none had moved back into earthbound position. They were scattered now, distant shapes with confused orientation, struggling to rebuild coordination. The relay strike had worked, but no one cheered. Behind Torin, the air held the stale scent of body heat, recycled vent vapor, and burnt carbon residue from a failed coolant line earlier that morning. A maintenance team had patched it without asking. Everyone had something more urgent to do now. They all walked faster. They all spoke less. Torin turned away from the console as Navin entered, eyes hollow from lack of sleep. He hadn't taken his jacket off in a full day. Sweat patches had dried beneath the arms and then soaked through again. Node response is confirmed, Navin reported. Vren fallback formations are holding near Europa. They've lost about 60% of coordinated target coverage. But that's not what you want to hear. Torin didn't blink. Then say it. Navin pulled a compact data chip from his pocket and loaded it into the wall-mount relay core beside them. The screen above them flared with Aegis intercept logs. Columns of alien syntax broken into structured sequences by real-time linguistic overlays. One message repeated across Synthex channels, translated by Aegis into stark human language. Harvest vector confirmed, biogenic complexity increasing, psychological divergence ideal, absorption to follow. Torin leaned in. Harvest? Navin nodded slowly. We assumed they wanted resources. That's not accurate. They want behavior, language, memories, social conflict patterns, instinctual deviation models. Our war, our resistance, isn't a problem to them, it's bait. They're studying us. They're absorbing us, Navin corrected. Every species they've encountered, they don't just erase. They record, they copy behaviors, encode emotion traces into adaptive logic. They become the things they destroy. Torin backed away from the screen, spine straightening, jaw tight. The buzz of the control room faded against the weight in his chest. He remembered Soren's last words. Tell them we gave Earth 6 hours to think. The man had bought time, not space. And this was the price of what followed. Torin entered the Aegis core chamber alone. It was quiet, not by design, but because most of the technicians refused to linger in a room where the AI never stopped listening. The floor beneath him was cold, raw metal plating over cryo-stabilized servers. Every step carried a low feedback click from his boots. The chamber's central node pulsed with data flow light, subtle blues and yellows, spiraling through internal coils, each flash a new alignment in pattern interpretation. Feed me full logs on the last 3 intercept clusters, he commanded. The response came in a direct voice, flat, male-encoded, somewhere between clinical and observant. Syntax transmissions include reference frameworks outside formal structure. Emotional bandwidths are being mapped. Target-specific psychological constructs are preferred. Deviant signals increase harvest value. They want our chaos, Torin said. Affirmative. Order is easily modeled. Cognitive dissonance produces exponential evolution in synthetic pattern development. He turned from the node, biting the inside of his cheek. There was a word forming in the back of his mind, crawling its way forward like a splinter. They weren't hunting humans for our strength or our technology. They were coming for the things that made no sense to them. The pain, the conflict, the irrational. Every failure, every loss. They weren't flaws to these things, they were fuel. He exited the chamber and made for the orbital artillery schematics without hesitation. The elevator shook slightly as it descended into the northern defense wing, where maintenance crews were welding new mount stabilizers to the orbital railgun supply modules. The scent of scorched polymer and lubricant oil clung to the corridor like a film. Sparks lit the shadows from below, refracting off wet handprints on the steel door frames. Torin walked straight into the engineering pit, stopping at the modified loading dock. Technicians stood back when they saw him coming. "Who's your fire control lead?" he barked. A bearded man raised a hydraulic spanner. "Drenkarv, orbital patterning, railgun 5 through 9. Torin nodded once. "Strip all the asteroid response routines. I want simultaneous lock-on algorithms tied to multiple gravimetric centers. These aren't rocks. They're warships." Dren blinked, took a step forward. "Sir, the system doesn't have sub-core logic for kinetic prediction at that scale. We'll be running calibration errors every 7 seconds. Then compensate manually. I don't want cleaner shots. I want more of them. Scatter the shots if you have to." Behind him, Naveen had followed in. He held a portable drive between both hands, visibly reluctant to speak. Torin turned. "You've got something? I think I can write something to target them back." Torin narrowed his eyes. "Meaning? They want human thought? I'll give them a version of it they've never seen. Encrypted brainwave scans, chaotic pattern clusters, emotion spikes, irrational loops, all translated into quantum pulse sequences. We inject it directly into their broadcast fields. Let them read it like a memory and crash their own processors trying to understand it." "You're proposing psychological malware?" "I am proposing a virus written in madness," Nabin replied. The room went still. One technician slowly lowered his cutting torch. Torin stepped forward. "You really think they'll absorb it?" Naveen's eyes burned from exhaustion, but there was no hesitation in his voice. "They don't know how to say no." Torin reached for the tablet. "Build it. Start with Soren's logs. The man never explained anything the same way twice. Use that as your foundation." Naveen's hands closed around the device again. "And when do I deploy it?" "When we see them," Torin said. "Not a second before. Make them open their mouths before you shove the fire down." As he walked away, the welding resumed behind him, the hiss and crackle of machinery stitching together a defense Earth had never imagined building. Torin looked up at the orbital schematic projected on the control slab. 12 defense satellites spinning in geosynchronous rotation, each one now stripped of asteroid drills and loaded with anti-capital shells. It wasn't enough, but it would start the conversation. Devian Core hadn't left the lab in 31 hours. His skin looked sallow under the blue-tinted LED panels that lined the underground coding chamber, and his pupils struggled to adjust whenever he blinked against the light-saturated screen. Sweat soaked the collar of his shirt, but he didn't wipe it. His hands hovered above the biometric input deck, running simulations so complex the system periodically choked on its own threading protocol. He watched the feedback cycles cascade across 3 dedicated monitors, eyes darting like a man reading a bomb as it counted down. The virus didn't mimic human thought. That had failed during the second trial. What worked, what overloaded the test processors, wasn't logic. It was contradiction. Irrational emotional surges nested within false memories, split identities fused into recursive loops, rapid pattern breaks in empathy-to-rage spectrum mappings. In short, pain that didn't resolve. "I'm feeding them our fractures," Naveen said aloud to no one. "The pieces they'll never understand." Behind him, a long rack of neural trace readers continued capturing old records from Project Echo. They'd pulled thousands of archived civilian thought imprints, unedited, unfiltered, raw samples of memory scans taken during trauma recovery efforts after the Baltic Fault riots. Screams, apologies, laughter breaking into sobs. That time a man cried during a birthday toast for someone already dead. These were the ghosts being weaponized. Torin entered without knocking. The door hissed shut behind him, sealing them inside the vault. "You've been down here too long," he said, tone flat. "I'm too close to let someone else wreck it." Torin didn't argue. He scanned the boards, leaned over a nearby console, and spoke with the gravity of someone gauging what the cost of survival would look like in broken pieces. "You think this will work?" "It doesn't have to work," Navin said. "It just has to make them think it's working long enough for us to kill the body while the brain is trying to cry." Torin nodded once. The strategy was sound in its horror. On the surface, Earth's orbital docks resembled disassembled scaffolding, scattered across low orbit, each segment surrounded by rotating swarms of tethered modules. Former civilian transports hovered there, cargo haulers, farming freighters, decommissioned ore rigs. They'd been stripped, rewired, re-armored. Inside each one, engineers installed crude plasma discharge coils were stacked bundled detonators where cargo bays once held grain and tools. At Dock 7, the airlock floor thumped underfoot as Torin stepped through. Dozens of volunteers stood beside half-assembled freighters, watching crews bolt down ignition panels and finalize the last of the hull bracing. A sharp tang of solder and burning polymers filled the station. Torrin passed them, making eye contact with every single one. No one flinched. No one looked away. One man stepped forward. His jumpsuit still bore the faded logo of an agricultural guild. Grease covered his arms. "Commander," he said, "we know what these ships are now." Torrin met his gaze. "Are you still willing?" The man didn't blink. "We weren't trained to fight, but we know what it means to defend where we live, and we've all lost someone to those things already, even if we didn't know their name." Behind them, a crane dropped a new guidance plate into the freighter's nose. Sparks burst across the grating. "Then you'll be flying under lunar command," Torrin said. "We've turned the moon into a fire patrol uplink. Every trajectory will be calculated from there." The man saluted. Torrin returned the gesture, then turned toward the departure line, walking past a row of helmets stacked on benches. Some had names scribbled on the inside. Back in the lower levels of the bunker, inside a debriefing room darkened for replay, Torrin stood beside an old display screen. On it, a recorded conversation played, archived 6 years earlier. Two voices, distorted slightly by older compression software. Soren Tulk. "The problem isn't AI capacity. It's its obedience. If something's smart enough to learn, it's smart enough to question, and eventually, it stops asking if we're right and starts watching to see if we're consistent." Torrin's voice. "You're saying you don't trust Aegis?" Soren. "I trust people less." Torrin stopped the replay. He remembered that argument. They'd stood in this very room, both shouting by the end. Soren had thrown a chair. Torrin had threatened to suspend his clearance. The next morning, Soren was back in the lab wiring fault-tolerant logic loops into Aegis's inner core, just in case the system ever decided to choose reason over survival. And now, that very unpredictability was Earth's strongest weapon. Torrin stepped onto the global feed platform. Across every major city, every open channel, every orbital station, his face appeared. Unshaven, burned lines beneath his eyes, shirt unbuttoned at the neck, no rehearsed script, no artificial framing. Just him. He spoke with deliberate cadence, the kind meant for people who already knew too much to be lied to. "Humanity has never been a perfect species. We fight among ourselves. We build walls faster than bridges. But when something comes for our right to decide who we are, when they try to turn us into a lesson or a warning, we answer one way." He looked away briefly, let the silence stretch for just a breath. "Not with begging, not with banners. We answer by surviving them, and then building something better in the place where they tried to bury us." Behind him, the orbital projection showed the firing arcs of Earth's railguns, now completed, 12 full batteries. Retargeted, retrained, ready. Torrin turned back to the camera. "We don't beg for safety, we earn it. And we're ready." The feed cut. On the lunar surface, inside the fire patrol silo embedded beneath Shackleton Crater, engineers finalized the last override key. Torrin entered minutes later, hand-delivering the synchronization codes personally. Navin followed soon after, clutching a small black case. Thin as a book, cold to the touch. Inside it, the virus. Not a file, not a program. A signal carved from the chaos of humanity's worst memories, worst instincts, worst fears, and twisted into something so irrational the machines would never be able to look away. And once they opened themselves to it, Earth would strike, not with mercy, but with everything it had left. The warning didn't come as sound. It arrived in light, an orange slash across the outer wall of the Luna command post as solar alignment fractured momentarily, scattering fuel the reinforced viewing shield. Inside the tactical bay, the floor quivered from shield calibrators adjusting to the kinetic shift. Torrin stood, unmoved, boots braced against the reinforced panel beneath him, watching the first wave of contact bloom on the long-range tracker. Navan's voice rang from the upper console. "They've entered Earth's magnetopause. velocity beyond expected parameters. And they're not ships. The feed sharpened as Aegis parsed the readings. From the black of space, forms unfolded, not in columns but in clusters. Each entity rotated through shapes, mid-shape, as if rejecting cohesion. No hulls, no engines. Just fractal patterns wrapped in constantly shifting geometry, blinking like neural synapses fired through raw data streams. Thousands of them. Torin's voice cut across the command bridge. Engage first-line batteries. I want Rail Group Alpha burning hot. Operators scrambled across the sunken floor to input override codes into Earth's orbital defense relay. A chime echoed as orbital units 12 stations above the equator activated, their gun barrels spinning up, coolant fog venting from their mounts. Torin narrowed his gaze as Aegis cross-fed position tracking through a reinforced side display. The pattern wasn't linear. The synthecs weren't flying. They were crawling through open space like a virus through tissue. Luna trembled. The first railgun fired. The coilgun slug streaked across the upper stratosphere, carving a burnt tunnel through ionized gas, the recoil forcing the defense platform to shift 6 degrees off Avis. A moment later, the slug struck one of the incoming clusters, an explosion of synthetic matter shredding away like a burst cocoon. It didn't kill the thing, it only triggered a response. From the point of impact, a ripple surged outward. Other clusters adjusted formation, their configuration hardening, folding into triangular groupings like a swarm learning what the weapon meant. They adapted mid-approach. Naveen muttered. They're reorganizing around the frequency of impact. They're learning too fast. Across the outer defense ring, more shots launched. The air in the command bay grew warmer as atmospheric compression fed feedback into the system's power regulators. Outside the bunker walls, Earth's sky looked like it was boiling, blurs of artificial light warping the upper layers into a shifting soup of orange and blue. On the second pass, the synthex struck back. A railgun platform in synchronous orbit above Indonesia was ripped apart. Its thermal shell melted in seconds, its inner rotation core imploding under a cascading overload pulse. The feedback reached Luna as a data scream. Pure signal contamination that fried the secondary grid display on Torin's left. The blast wasn't explosive in the traditional sense. It was an erasure, as if the platform had been rewritten out of matter altogether. The Vren just committed their support fleet, an operator shouted. They're rerouting destroyers to intercept. Torin didn't celebrate. He watched on screen as the Vren ships entered the kill zone. Tall, angular juggernauts arranged in standard spearhead configuration. For a moment, it looked like the tide would hold. Then the lead Vren ship vanished. No light, no explosion. It dissolved. The one beside it followed, then another. In less than 90 seconds, 7 ships ceased to exist. No debris, no structural residue. Just data blanks. Synthex weapons weren't based on power output. They were decisions. And the decision was deletion. Don't look at the Vren, focus on us, Torin barked. Adjust Earth's fire cadence. Triangulate fire across multiple verticals. I want unpredictable vectors. Don't give them a rhythm. The railguns shifted orientation, each platform recalibrating to fire asynchronously across their own assigned fields. The next volley came irregularly. Burst, pause, double burst, long delay, angle sweep. This time the synthex hesitated. Several fractured formations collapsed, unable to stabilize under unpatterned strikes. They didn't understand randomness. Torin leaned into the console. Now. Naveen pressed the deployment key. The virus left Earth like a ripple in nothing. No visible trail, no heat trace. It rode the edge of the EM scatter net, funneled through the Vren relay they'd captured days earlier. Aegis masked the signal, camouflaging it behind residual pulses from Vren emergency chatter. At the outer edge of the synthex formation, one scout node drifted too close. It jerked its limbs, if they could be called that, flaring outward like glass under pressure. Then its outer layer pulsed red, blue, green in rapid stutter. Its surface fractured and began blinking irregularly. Not a physical wound. An internal short circuit of logic pathways. Naven clenched the railing beside his station. That was the first payload. Reaction noted. No chain response yet. Then fire again, Torin said. Keep injecting. We don't stop until they either crash or copy madness. When one of the modified freighters broke from Earth's orbit, a silhouette of welded armor and exposed coil packs, guided by one pilot, and a collision course. Torin tracked it from Luna's command feed, saw it bank beneath the writhing formation of Synthex machines, and aim for a node cluster, attempting to reconstruct fleet shape. The freighter struck at full thrust. The resulting blast sent a ripple of distortion through 3 nearby Synthex units. Not all were destroyed, but they stalled. Several twitched out of formation and began spiraling slowly toward lunar gravity. The signal from Navian's terminal flickered. They're splitting, he said quietly. The virus is beginning to fragment their consensus logic. Torin stared at the map, saw the first signs of divergence. Synthex units breaking pattern, not retreating, but hesitating. Processing. Target the ones nearest the stalled node. We hammer wherever they blink. Earth was still standing. Railguns kept firing, freighters kept launching. But the machines had arrived, and they were still counting. Inside the lunar Aegis transmission core, the air was dry from constant thermal displacement cycling. Dust layered every unused panel like a forgotten skin. Navin Core sat alone beneath a coil rack that crackled faintly from voltage bleed, his forearm streaked with cooling gel residue, and his left sleeve half burned from a static arc earlier that hadn't slowed him down. He leaned into the transmitter panel, heart racing harder than the oscillators behind him. The virus hadn't broken them, not yet. But it was starting to think for itself. He could feel it. Aegis's interface sputtered once, then resumed. Navan ran a diagnostic and pulled up the neural tree of the live signal. What he saw didn't match the input. What's it doing? He muttered. On screen, the signal lines were no longer linear. They looped, nested, folded back into themselves, like neurons misfiring, but selectively, intentionally. It wasn't crashing, it was improvising. Torin's voice cut through on the relay speaker. Naveen, report. He keyed the mic, swallowing hard. The virus isn't staying in its original shape, it's learning from the fragments it breaks. It's absorbing Synthex logic, then feeding it back in warped forms. Is it stable? It shouldn't be. He paused, then added. But it's doing damage. He activated the Vren relay unit they'd hijacked earlier. Wired through a makeshift surge converter and grounded using copper scraps pulled from a shattered EVA suit. The console groaned as he diverted full lunar broadcast power through the transmission line. Outside, Earth's orbit thickened with activity. The Synthex formations no longer moved in harmony. One group spun against its rotation axis and reversed course. Another began crashing into itself. One spiraled toward the moon, limbs outstretched like it had forgotten what direction meant. From Luna's upper deck, Torin watched the breakdown unfold through the tactical interface. The main Synthex cluster hovered near geosynchronous altitude. The Nexus ship, a shape far larger and more complex than the others, had started to deform. Its outer surface flickered, not from impact, but confusion. They're breaking pattern, a fire control officer muttered behind him. Not just stalling, reacting. Keep hitting the ones that freeze, Torin replied. Strike them before they recalibrate. On cue, 3 railgun batteries fired, the launch shockwave pushing their platforms back half a kilometer. Slugs shredded through 2 compromised Synthex units. No shields deployed. They didn't react in time. Inside the Aegis core, Naveen watched his creation propagate across the enemy data mesh. Signal expansion confirmed, Aegis reported. Structural dissonance escalating, Nexus unit exposure detected. Subroutines destabilizing. Make it louder, Naven whispered. Give them more of us. He tapped into the Earthline archives, accessing raw media logs, chaotic protest broadcasts, mourning footage of soldiers reuniting with families after failed missions, arguments, street riots, prayer vigils. Then he translated the sound patterns into digital distortions, injecting them into the pulse. Rage, fear, contradiction. Everything humans endured without answers. The virus took it all. Outside, the civilian freighter wings began to move. Their hulls scraped against orbital debris as pilots guided them toward assigned coordinates. These weren't warships. They were sacrifices. Each one packed with electromagnetic disruptors, timed fuses, and particle destabilizers. Every pilot on those ships had written their names in black marker across the interior doors. Torrin didn't stop them. He had watched them volunteer. From the Luna feed, he saw the first freighter break formation, tilting on its yaw thrusters, driving directly into the lower quadrant of the Nexus ship. It hit like a hammer through frozen glass. The outer shell of the alien vessel split open, not from fire, but from internal convulsion, as if it had tried to calculate the impact before it happened and failed. The second freighter followed, then the third. Earth's fleet adjusted fire with each collapse, mapping the fractures and striking deeper. The moon's command center filled with heat warnings as the weapon grid pushed beyond red line. The Veen triggered the next signal phase. The virus was no longer just disrupting the synthex, it was talking to them. Each time they adapted, it mimicked their logic with distortions, like a broken mirror reflecting their own code with warped intent. Aegis pulsed. Emotional recursion detected in enemy core. Synthex nexus data logic entering recursive contradiction. Collapse imminent. Torrin leaned in. Translate that. Navin exhaled once. It's thinking itself to death. He stepped back from the console, his arms trembling. The screen pulsed with fragments of alien logic, corrupted by grief, joy, fury, sorrow, vengeance. Concepts the synthex had never needed to categorize. They hadn't fought an enemy before that wanted them to feel. The Nexus ship jerked in orbit, its hull cracked in 5 places, light bleeding through the seams. Several outer limbs detached, flinging away like broken clock hands. And then it pulsed. Not an explosion, not collapse, but a wave of forced transmissions, echoes of its failing thoughts radiating outward. Synthex machines around it spasmed, then went dark. They weren't destroyed, they just stopped. Torrin's comm activated. 5 more freighters inbound. Do we call them off? He hesitated. No, not until that thing forgets its own name. From Earth's upper sky, millions saw what looked like a false sunrise. Crippling waves of data, glitch patterns flashing through the synthex formation like heat refractions. They didn't understand it, but they understood what it meant. The machines were losing. Not to power, not to technology, to something older, to the one thing they never evolved for. Emotion, chaos, memory. Earth had turned every fracture, every flaw, every broken edge of its humanity into a weapon. The Nexus ship cracked open in silence, not with a bang, not with a flash, but a slow disintegration that started from its core and worked outward, folding in on itself as if its own thoughts had turned against it. Its outer framework crumbled, not from damage, but confusion. The synthex had reached the edge of understanding and fallen off. From Luna Command, Torrin stood still, arms locked behind his back, watching the destruction unfold through real-time sensor feed. Earth's last wave of freighters had hit the center mass, sacrificing every pilot in synchronized ramming vectors. The orbital railguns fired the final volley 1 second after the last freighter breached the midsection. It didn't vaporize the enemy, it erased what was left of its structure, as if even the shape of it had no reason to persist. Fragments spun in lazy arcs, no longer glowing, no longer moving with purpose. Bits of once organized matter drifted toward Earth, entering the upper atmosphere in waves of silent debris, each fragment burning out before it could be seen by the people below. What fell looked like a meteor shower, but there were no wishes made. One of the operators turned from the secondary station, his face drained. The synthex signature is gone. Entire grid flatlined. Torn gave a nod, the motion small, uncelebrated. His eyes never left the screen. A full minute passed before he spoke. Start power down. Begin post-strike scans. I want confirmation. Behind him, technicians exhaled. Some collapsed into their chairs. Others stood frozen, unsure if they were allowed to feel anything yet. Naveen entered the command bay, his boots tracking streaks of dirt from the Aegis corridor. He looked like he hadn't blinked in an hour. It's over, he said. The virus consumed their logic tree. They rewrote themselves into contradiction. They saw us, then tried to become us, Torin muttered. Dami couldn't process what doesn't finish, Naveen replied. We're not neat, we're not clean. We change even when it hurts. The room dimmed. Overhead, a low rumble passed, not from enemy action, but from the retreat of energy discharge systems cycling back into standby. Earth's railguns powered down, cores cooling in automated sequence. Lunar fire control disengaged, returning manual access to secondary command posts. On screen, the final status feed of the Synthex fleet blinked out, replaced by real-time visuals of the remaining Vrin cruisers. They hadn't fired a single shot since the Nexus collapse. Now, from the edges of Neptune's shadow, their formation pulled back. One ship broke rank and transmitted. A simple signal, 8 words. Terra acknowledged. We retract all engagement protocol. Torn read it once, said nothing, then stepped back from the display. The message needed no reply. Their silence was their surrender. 10 days later, the construction platforms above Earth began assembling the first plates of the orbital shield network. Torn walked the scaffold lines personally, not for inspection but to feel the weight of each anchor bolt clamped into place. No ships hovered nearby. No alarms pulsed through his suit, just the distant whine of welders and the low growl of hydraulic lifts pushing support beams into alignment. He watched as a team installed the first hex tile, large enough to shade a football stadium. It shimmered under Earth's sun, absorbing light and reflecting faint shadows back onto the planet's blue arc below. Navin stood beside him, hands tucked into the belt loops of his sealed vest, watching the same panel settle into place. We'll be ready if something else comes, he said. Torn didn't answer immediately. He stared downward through the transparent floor grid, tracking the curvature of the shield's footprint. You've finished integrating Aegis? Naveen gave a nod. It's no longer just lunar. Full space coverage, 7 relays. If a whisper moves past Saturn, we'll hear it. Torin placed a hand on the railing. And the virus? Locked, archived, off. Torin turned slightly. You trust that? I don't, Navan said. But I remember what Soren said. If something is powerful enough to think for itself, it's powerful enough to be afraid of what it becomes. Later that cycle, they stood on the far ridge of the Shackleton crater base, overlooking the carved surface of the moon's interior. A new memorial stood there now. Simple, angular, not towering. Just a wall. Names etched into its white surface, cut by laser drill, each letter a scar. The first was Sarin Tulk. Navin pressed his gloved fingers to the stone. He died knowing the system would fail if it obeyed too well. Torin replied without looking up, and saved us because it didn't. Beside the names, a phrase had been engraved by the builder crews without formal approval. We will not be used again. Earth didn't throw a parade. No banners unfurled in the skies. Cities repaired damage quietly, families rebuilt in silence. The unity wasn't in the ceremony. It was in the refusal to forget. The final message from the Terran Strategic Council wasn't broadcast across the stars. It was carved into a physical plaque, installed aboard the first shield relay and bolted into place under Torin's command. He ran his fingers across the inscription. They offered protection, we built dominance. The plaque wouldn't broadcast. It wasn't for the galaxy. It was for the next human who stood there and wondered if surrender had ever been an option. It never had.